Hey friends, it's Ryan. Thanks so much for joining me for today's daily devotional. As I get ready to step out of my position here, one of the things that I'm going to miss is telling stories. I love telling stories to kids. It's incredibly important and so much fun getting to see their faces light up as they understand the deeper meaning of the story, even the little things like getting to do fun accents and say silly words and do all of the sorts of things that you do to draw a kid into a story. I just love telling stories. I come by it honestly. My grandfather was a natural storyteller. I remember growing up listening to him tell us stories about his life. He was a glider pilot in World War II. He trained glider pilots. Later on in his life, he worked at Martin Marietta, working with the space program. He met a number of the astronauts who went up on the Mercury and Apollo missions, and it really sparked a love of space in my life when I was a young child. Telling stories is huge for kids. It's incredibly important. And I also know this because the Bible tells us too. The people of God escape from slavery in Egypt, and they're led by Moses across the Red Sea and through the wilderness and almost to the edge of the Promised Land. And then Joshua takes them that final step across, and they conquer cities, and they set up their nation there in the Promised Land with Joshua. The people who had traveled with Moses and with Joshua had seen the amazing things that God had done, all the way back to the 10 plagues in Egypt, the way that the angel of death passed over the houses of the people of God, the splitting of the Red Sea, the 10 commandments, the manna and quail that sustained the people of God through the desert. All of these amazing miracles. And then even into the Promised Land, under Joshua, things like the fall of the city of Jericho as they walked around it 7 times with trumpets and the walls just came tumbling down. Sign after sign after sign after sign that God was with them, that God was leading them, that God had expectations for them about how they would live in the world. And then Joshua dies, and the book of Joshua ends. The very next book is the book of Judges. And it starts like this. In the 2nd chapter of the book of Judges, it says that whole generation that had been with Moses, had been with Joshua, had seen these signs and wonders from God, that whole generation, it says in Judges, was gathered up to the ancestors, which is just a beautiful phrase. And then another generation came up after them that did not know about God. And the next couple of chapters of Judges start to show how that generation messes things up. They do evil in the sight of the Lord, it says at one point. How is it that generation that was just after the people had seen all of these signs and wonders from God about how much God loved them, about what God wanted them to do in the world, how is it that they got to a place in the Promised Land where they did evil in the sight of the Lord? And I think it's because they weren't told stories. In the book of Deuteronomy, before Moses leads them to the edge of the Promised Land, Moses receives instruction from God, and one of them is the Shema, the prayer that I carry on my thumb. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is your God, the Lord is one. But more than that, right after it, in Deuteronomy 6, it tells the people to teach these stories to your children. When you walk along the road, when you get up, when you eat meals, when you lie down, to tell the stories to your children. It literally says that in Deuteronomy 6. And I think that that's what that generation that was gathered up to their ancestors neglected to do. Because the kids who came after them didn't know how to live with God. That's why storytelling is so important. The only way we know things is because people tell things to us. The only way we know the story of Jesus is because somebody saw it happen, who told somebody, who told somebody, who told somebody, all the way down until somebody told my parents, who told me about Jesus. Friends, as I get ready to step out of this ministry, one of the things that I want to lay in your hands is a love of telling stories to children. The stories of our faith, the stories of your lives. These stories help shape the kids that are coming up next, the kids in our community who very soon will be pulling the levers of power in our world. The stories that we tell them matter, and the stories that we don't tell them matter too. So my question for you today, friends, my challenge to you, my exhortation to you, what stories are you telling? And what kids are you surrounding yourself with that you are telling those stories to? There is a place for you here at LOPC to do that. If you like telling stories, if you find this to be important too, there are kids here who need, who want to hear these stories. So that's my challenge. What stories can you tell, and who are you telling them to?